Ever been told Azure AD B2B and B2C are basically the same? Just pick whichever seems easiest. If you rely on Microsoft 365 for your business, that shortcut can quietly unravel your entire identity strategy. Today, I'll tackle why making the wrong choice here isn't just a technical detail, it can create serious security gaps and workflow headaches down the road. Ready to debunk the biggest myths and hear what really matters when designing for external users? Let's dig in. The most expensive myth in Microsoft identity. If you've spent any time around Microsoft identity discussions, you've probably heard it in a hallway or a Teams call. Why overthink it? B2B and B2C do the same thing, right? That one assumption has quietly drained endless hours and budget from otherwise sharp IT teams, all because the differences don't look dramatic on the surface. But this isn't just a case of bad product naming. The real problem is that people treat B2B and B2C as plug-and-play alternatives for external users, ignoring the impact that choice has on everything from daily logins to audits, compliance, and even the next round of license renewals. Let's start straight with the myth. The idea that Azure AD B2B and B2C can be swapped in for each other because they both let outsiders sign in is about as accurate as saying SharePoint and OneDrive both store files, so who cares which you use? Here's where it bites in the real world. An IT team hands off a project to marketing to launch a partner portal. Marketing, seeing B2C's slick sign-up screens and branding controls, figures it's simpler. They build out the portal, invite in a dozen partner organizations, and all seems smooth until next year's audit cycle lands. Suddenly, they're hunting for activity logs that don't exist, fielding questions about who approved which partner's access, and realizing they've painted themselves into a corner with licensing. Now it's a scramble to retrofit security controls when everyone's already using the system, and the budget's maxed out fixing other problems. So, what's Microsoft actually saying here? B2B isn't a flashy label. It draws a hard line around working with people who need to collaborate with your organization, partners, vendors, contractors. The goal is to let these folks inside the tent, often with access to your Teams, SharePoint, or even back-end Microsoft 365 workloads. In contrast, B2C is purpose-built for customer-facing apps, the kind you roll out to thousands or millions of retail consumers logging in from wherever, often with the option to use their social identities. It's not simply about who's external, it's about the roles those external people play and the kind of relationship they have with you. The stakes aren't just theoretical, and Microsoft doesn't mince words in their documentation. Azure AD B2B is designed for secure collaboration with external partners, leveraging your organization's security controls. Azure AD B2C is an identity platform for your customers, allowing flexible sign-up journeys and large-scale customization. That's straight from their own guidance. And if you've ever tried mixing those use cases, the cracks show up almost immediately. It's also a distinction MVPs hammer home. The most common regret shared by seasoned architects is letting a business case drive the technical choice instead of starting with the practical security and management requirements. Let's break it down on the technical front. Want to federate with another Azure tenant? B2B eats that for breakfast, offering seamless invitations and external access that tie into your existing compliance stack. Need to bring in a freelance team for a 6-month sprint? B2B gives you lifecycle management, conditional access, group membership, and organizational auditing, all mapped against your own policies. Meanwhile, B2C rewrites the rules. Federation here means creating and managing custom policies for every external identity provider, from Google to Facebook, with entirely different controls. Sign up and sign in journeys can be tailored for that consumer feel, but you don't get the rich object level auditing or unified reporting inside Azure AD proper. Managing external users becomes more like running a high traffic public website. Great if you're rolling out a public rewards app, not so great if your lawyers will want logs pulled for a partner who accessed quarterly forecasts last June. The kicker is how these architectural guardrails ripple beyond security into the user experience and support overhead. You might save a month of build time upfront, but misaligning the platform blows up in slow motion. For example, B2B leverages the familiar Azure AD directory. Users show up as guests, get controlled with your groups and policies, and most importantly, can be walled off with conditional access rules. Try bolting the same process onto B2C, and you quickly learn that the management plane is its own parallel universe. Delegation, reporting, even just seeing who still actively needs access becomes a series of custom builds or out-of-band processes that cost way more down the road. Here's the thread most people miss. Picking the easy one rarely pays off. 2 years later, especially if your business pivots, mergers happen, or new compliance regulations drop out of the sky. Technical debt in the identity stack doesn't look dangerous at first. It acts like friction, not failure, and you only feel it once you're locked in. Rebuilding user journeys, migrating access, and retraining every support desk agent is never painless, no matter what the original project timeline promised. So the difference isn't abstract, it lands directly on your roadmap. Pick wrong, and you're buying into months of avoidable rework and possible audit gaps. The sticker shock is real when you finally discover you've been missing critical security controls all along. But that raises an awkward question. If one does collaboration and the other handles customer sign-ins, why does Microsoft still keep both alive? And what hidden pitfalls should you watch out for, buried in the documentation they hand-wave past during sales demos? Why Microsoft keeps two solutions and why it matters. If you've ever been the one stuck explaining to a VP why guest users can't get into a Teams channel, you already understand the elephant in the room. If both B2B and B2C handle external users, why didn't Microsoft just design one system that covers every possible case? It would seem like the simpler answer, but Microsoft didn't go that route for good reason. And unless you've wrestled with both sides of the platform, you might not see where everything splits off. Let's draw a sharp line where Microsoft does. Azure AD B2B is their answer for the internal business world. Partner access, vendor collaboration, and contractor onboarding. This isn't about opening the door to just anyone with an email address. It's about letting other organizations work inside your digital walls, often with the same apps and conditional access rigging you use internally. B2C, on the other hand, is built for those moments you want to let in the entire outside world. Retail customers, broad audiences, people you'll never know by name. These are the folks who show up at all hours, using every device and signing up in droves. B2C is designed to scale way past anything you'll likely do with B2B, and it gives you the tools to handcraft exactly how those users sign in, what brands they see, and what information they're required to share. But here's where it gets messy, and even seasoned admins have stumbled. Both B2B and B2C claim they can let in a user with a Gmail account or a Facebook login. So from 30,000 feet, they seem to bleed into each other. The similarity ends fast once you actually build out a production system. Picture managing a group of project-based consultants. Someone on the team figures, oh, let's just use B2C. We'll let consultants sign up directly with whatever identity they want. Problem is, when the time comes to plug those consultants into Teams or SharePoint for day-to-day work, you find out B2C isn't built to play in that sandbox. Those users won't show up in the people picker, won't get assigned to Teams channels, and your IT support lines get a spike from partners locked out of the workflows they need. This architectural split goes deeper than licensing or UI polish. Under the hood, B2C doesn't run on the same Azure AD directory engine as your main tenant. Think of it as two separate platforms that speak similar but not identical languages. B2B users are treated as guests within your native directory, inheriting much of the same structure for groups, conditional access, and reporting, while B2C users float in a custom consumer store that's purpose-built for public audiences. Want rich auditing, dynamic group membership, and compliance hooks? You'll get it naturally from B2B because it fits squarely into the existing Microsoft 365 security and management stack. B2C offers its own policy engine tailored for registration flows and branding, but the gap in integration starts to show the moment your users need anything beyond a basic login. Let's put that into a tangible scenario. A consulting firm gets hired by a client who already uses Microsoft 365 for everything. The team tries to onboard their consultants through the client's B2C directory, thinking it'll be easier. Instead, they realize the consultants can log in, but the client can't assign them to Teams, can't push policies to their accounts, and can't see their actions in the regular M365 audit logs. Any attempt to fix this ends up kludgy, like whipping up custom code or inventing out-of-band approval workflows, all of which introduce risk and support costs. There's another angle most folks overlook. B2C is engineered for scale and fine-grained customization. If you need a branded front end for millions of users, progressive profiling, and social login support that covers every base, B2C will let you script every step of the journey. On the flip side, B2B is never going to give you pixel-perfect registration screens or workflows that personalize every field, but it will drop new users squarely into your organization's existing ecosystem. That distinction matters because Microsoft wants you to use B2B for collaboration and B2C for customer interactions. Their own documentation flat out states that mixing them usually ends in support tickets and workaround fatigue. Best practice from Microsoft: draw the perimeter first. Collaboration equal B2B, public facing customer access equal B2C. If you catch yourself stretching one platform past that boundary, you're in for complexity, sometimes right away, sometimes in the form of shadow IT that comes back to haunt you a year later. We've all seen projects spiral when someone insists on just making B2C do one more thing for their consultants or external vendors, only to realize that the core Microsoft 365 features don't talk to those identities. So Microsoft isn't doubling up platforms as a licensing grab. Each exists because it specializes. Try to force customer identity processes through B2B, and you'll hit walls around branding, scale, and journey customization. Try to use B2C for workforce needs, and you'll battle lackluster integration, security, and reporting. The lesson is that features can look similar at first, but trying to jam both scenarios onto a single tool nearly always results in pain points that spill over into budgets, compliance, and user satisfaction. Naturally, this isn't just about ticking off items on a feature list. The real headaches show up when you scale past a pilot project. Licensing and security decisions you made early can cascade into thousands in extra cost, or worse, a compliance headache nobody saw coming. The licensing and security traps no one warns you about. If you've ever spent a late night crunching numbers for an app rollout, you know the real drama starts when you scale a proof of concept into something the business actually depends on. With Azure AD B2B and B2C, those costs can sneak up in ways that don't show up in the project kickoff. Most of us have spun up a quick B2B guest invite or put together a flashy B2C user journey just to show a manager how it might look, but the meter doesn't really start running until users pile in, compliance audits kick off, and billing cycles roll over with thousands of accounts. Here's where it gets tricky. There's a persistent myth that B2B guest users are basically free. People hear 5 free guests per licensed user and tune out the details. Then there's B2C, which feels like a budget-friendly infinity pool at first, since you only get charged for authentications and premium features. In reality, this is where the financial cracks start to appear, especially if you mismatch your use case with the licensing model. For example, using B2C to onboard what are really business partners because it's easier to slap a logo on a portal means you're paying for every login, every step-up authentication, every custom policy call. Meanwhile, bringing retail customers onto B2B might seem savvy if you want them in your Teams or SharePoint, but once you try to actually customize their experience or scale to tens of thousands, the license fees and management overhead scale up right along with your user base. I've watched more than one team run into this wall head on. A software company wanted to build a sleek customer portal for help desk tickets and premium downloads, so they picked Azure AD B2B, thinking it lives in our tenant, so it'll be secure by default. They got through the pilot phase just fine. But then the branding customization started. The business needed end users to face their own logo, privacy language, and a frictionless password reset. Basic stuff in B2C. In B2B, suddenly, the project was burning hours on workarounds, templates, and hacky flows that never quite matched the UX of competing SaaS vendors. Then came multi-factor authentication demands. Not just out of the box, but with options for methods undiscoverable in basic B2B licensing. When the monthly active user bill arrived, it turned out their guest users weren't so cheap after all, especially when layered on premium security features. By then, data had sprawled across both real customer objects and phantom guests, none of which mapped cleanly for support tickets or GDPR exports. No one remembered to budget for the consultant hours, rehabbing the whole thing 6 months after launch. The licensing math never stops being a moving target. B2B sits on a monthly active user model, so as long as you stay within your 5 free guests per user tier, you may save money, unless your external workforce grows faster than your internal one, or you start enabling features like identity protection, which trigger new license requirements. B2C flips the formula. It charges you based on authentication volume and the consumption of premium features, not headcount. So as your portal gets popular, the bill grows with every extra sign-in, each multi-factor prompt, every step-up event. The worst part, the break-even point, the moment when one becomes more expensive than the other, isn't obvious until you look back at 3 months of actual usage patterns. And by then, switching isn't usually quick or clean. That's before you even get to the security trade-offs. B2B was built for integration with your Microsoft 365 security posture out of the gate. You get conditional access, identity governance options, and granular auditing all flowing through the same dashboard as your internal users. That means when compliance asks for a full readout of partner activity in your tenant, you're not scraping logs from multiple sources or trying to explain gaps in recorded access. B2C security is no slouch for what it is, especially on public-facing portals, but out of the box, you don't get the same depth of controls or centralized reporting for user access. You're forced to bake in your own audit hooks, which often means leaning into custom code, APIs, or external CM solutions just to get the basics your auditors want. There's another problem that creeps in with B2C used for what should have been B2B. You think you're solving for convenience by letting partners or even internal staff sign up through a slick web page, but what you're actually creating is a parallel user management system that sits outside your primary policies and governance. That gap opens the door to unexpected access risks. Password policies may not line up with IT standards. Lifecycle management, you'll be handling it yourself, identity by identity. Revocation is messy, especially if users slip through routine audits because their account never enters the main directory. Microsoft's own best practice is simple. Always map out the user journey and compliance requirements before picking your external identity solution. Who are these users? What level of access do they need? What happens when they leave? Who needs to see their sign-ins or revoke their access instantly? The more you answer upfront, the less likely you are to build a system that stings you after the project manager has signed off. The wrong identity choice means you're committing not just to today's costs and controls, but to a whole life cycle of maintenance and unplanned spend. Fixing these mistakes after launch rarely happens without pain. By then, everyone's used to the system, and the support load only grows while you rebuild your architecture on the fly. And all this brings us to a real challenge. How do you translate these licensing and security realities to stakeholders who tune out the moment you say user federation and just want to know that external access will work? Translating identity choices for stakeholders without the eye glaze. If you've ever tried explaining external identity to a CFO or marketing director, you know the moment their enthusiasm fizzles, somewhere between user provisioning and claims transformation. The truth is most business leaders just want things to work. Their job isn't learning the nuts and bolts of Azure. It's keeping projects on time and customers satisfied. So the burden falls on IT to translate those deeply unsexy technical details into something the rest of the business actually cares about. The challenge is if you don't, you end up taking shortcuts, and those shortcuts are exactly what lead to security gaps and rework. I've seen the just pick something easy approach up close. There was a project lead, sharp, pragmatic, not a techie, heading up a vendor portal. His logic was simple. B2C has that slick, customizable sign-up, so onboarding partners will be less hassle. On the surface, it looked perfect. They branded every pixel, simplified the registration, and shaved a few weeks off the rollout. But problems started popping up fast. The vendors couldn't be added to Teams channels or SharePoint sites for document sharing. MFA settings didn't match company policy. Worst of all, onboarding might have been easier, but offboarding, making sure former vendors actually lost access to sensitive data, turned into a manual mess. The story ends where so many do, a scramble to bolt on features later, and a budget ballooning when it could have stayed flat. The first key is dropping the jargon and speaking in analogies that make the stakes real. It works because everyone knows what a physical office is, so moving the conversation there makes technical fences easy to picture. B2B is your front desk with guest badges and a security guard. It's for partners, vendors, or temp staff who need to walk the halls with you, share documents, maybe even book a conference room. The guard sees who's in, tracks when they leave, and you're covered for compliance checks. B2C, though, is your public lobby. Glass doors, friendly signage, and a check-in kiosk. You want everyone to feel welcome and the process to be smooth, but you're not letting anyone past the turnstile into the core business unless there's a really good reason. When you explain where each is best, even the least technical person gets why you don't just hand everyone the same key. I push teams to focus on mapping requirements to workflows instead of tech specs. For any project, IT and the business need to agree. Are these users collaborating with us, meaning they need access to Microsoft 365 apps, shared documents, and the ability to use internal tools? Or are we launching a public facing app where anyone can sign up, claim a discount code, or update their profile but never touch internal systems? If you stick to user stories, the contractor needs to join our weekly Teams call versus a shopper needs to reset their password without calling support. Then you'll naturally find which direction makes sense. That clarity also gives you a solid answer when asked why some features matter or why a particular platform isn't flexible enough. Aligning with Microsoft's recommended scenarios does more than save you pain later. It makes compliance and audit so much easier to discuss. Auditors and privacy officers care about traceability and access controls. When you've used B2B for actual partners, your logs live in one place. When you've rolled out B2C for customers and can show separation from your business systems, you avoid nasty surprises. Plus, being able to point to official guidance, Microsoft recommends this model for this purpose, shuts down a lot of the can't we just use X for this and move on debates. There's a subtle relief in having your design choices backed by Microsoft's own blueprint when the questions start flying from the compliance side. Realistically, hybrid scenarios happen more than people like to admit. Sometimes you genuinely need both B2B and B2C in the same organization. Maybe the partner portal needs to let in actual vendors who collaborate directly with staff, but you also want to offer a minimalist public view or registration for external consumers. That's not a red flag unless no one thought ahead about how those identities will be managed separately. The real risk isn't using both, it's having no plan and ending up with three disconnected islands where users get lost or slip through the cracks. So the guidance here is to state early, we might end up with both systems, but here's why, and here's how we keep them cleanly separated. There's a pattern that emerges on projects where you explain these decisions well. Technical constraints turn into conversations about business goals instead of obstacles. When stakeholders hear this allows customers in, this lets partners collaborate, it's not the same job, and you tie every choice back to how it keeps sensitive data safe or reduces future maintenance, you get more than just checkbox approval. People start thinking two steps ahead, and you avoid that familiar, we wish we'd known this earlier moment on the next big initiative. All of this boils down to one principle. When you make identity choices relatable to people's actual work, less about the tech and more about how it impacts onboarding, compliance, and long-term maintenance, you not only win faster buy-in, but you future-proof your architecture against nasty surprises. And when it comes to external users, the stakes for getting it right versus getting locked into a costly corner are higher than they look on paper. That's what makes the next step matter, understanding exactly what you risk or gain depending on how the initial choice plays out. If you've ever picked an identity platform just to get a project moving, you know the real story begins long after that first deployment. Choosing B2B or B2C isn't just picking the right interface, it shapes who you trust, how audits happen, and whether your business can adapt as you grow. The next time someone brushes off identity choices with just use whatever's easiest, push back. Ask what happens when teams onboard or offboard or when a new regulation hits. Your decisions today lock in workflows, security posture, and customer experience.